Sunday dinners at my grandparents' estate were sacred family traditions. The warmth, the stories, the unconditional love in those rooms shaped me. When they passed, leaving behind a $10 million inheritance, I never imagined it would tear us apart. My sister Amelia had always been distant from them while I treasured every moment. Recently, something had changed in my parents' eyes when they looked at me. That afternoon, I walked into our family home expecting celebration, but instead found cold stares that froze my heart. Before I tell you how my entire life collapsed that day, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you have ever had family betray your trust. I am Theodore, a 32-year-old financial analyst who worked my way through college waiting tables and taking overnight shifts at a local warehouse. My grandparents always admired my work ethic, so different from my parents who had lived off family wealth without contributing much to society. Grandpa William built his fortune from nothing, starting as a dock worker and eventually owning shipping companies across 3 states. Grandma Eleanor managed their investments brilliantly, doubling their wealth through strategic real estate acquisitions. They took special interest in my education, paying for business school after seeing me graduate with honors despite my exhausting work schedule. "Theodore," my grandfather would say, squeezing my shoulder with his weathered hand, "someday this legacy will be yours because you understand the value of honest work." They promised their inheritance would help me launch the ethical investment firm I had planned for years, one that would help ordinary people build wealth while supporting sustainable businesses. Just last month, I had been promoted to senior analyst at my firm. My bosses were impressed with my strategy that had saved a struggling local business while increasing investor returns. I had planned to use part of my inheritance to finally launch my own company, while investing the rest conservatively, as my grandparents had taught me. The atmosphere was unusual when I arrived at my parents' mansion that Sunday. The housekeeper avoided eye contact as she took my coat. The familiar sounds of conversation and laughter were replaced by tense silence. In the formal living room, rarely used except for showing off to important guests, my father Richard sat rigidly in his leather chair. Mother perched on the sofa, her manicured nails tapping impatiently against a crystal tumbler of scotch. And there was my sister Amelia, 35 years old but still acting entitled, draped across the chaise lounge in designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Sit down, Theodore," my father commanded without the usual hug or handshake. "We need to discuss the family finances." I took a seat, noticing Amelia's smirk as she examined her fresh manicure. My father cleared his throat and adjusted his Italian silk tie. "As you know, your grandparents left behind considerable assets," he began formally. "After careful consideration, your mother and I have reinterpreted their wishes regarding the distribution." My mother nodded, her diamond earrings catching the light. "We have decided that Amelia will receive the entire inheritance." The words hit me like a physical blow. What? That makes no sense. Grandpa and Grandma explicitly told everyone I would inherit their estate. They were confused in their final years, my mother said dismissively. "Amelia needs the money more. She has 3 children to support." I nearly laughed. My sister's children were adults who had dropped out of multiple colleges and lived in properties my parents had purchased for them. "This is absurd," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Grandpa and Grandma were sharp until the end. They knew exactly what they wanted. "The decision has been made," my father snapped. "The money has already been transferred to accounts in your sister's name." I stood up, my mind racing. This cannot be legal. "What about the actual written will? I want to see it right now." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Those documents are private family matters. Your grandparents would be disappointed in your greed." The audacity of her statement left me speechless. These were the same grandparents who had practically raised me while my parents jetted around the world on endless vacations. The same grandparents who had attended every one of my school events while my parents sent their assistants with expensive gifts instead of showing up themselves. "I am not leaving until I see the will," I insisted, my voice finding its strength again. "You cannot just steal $10 million from me because you decided Amelia deserves it more." My father stood suddenly, his face flushing with anger. "You will not speak to us this way in our home. Your presence is no longer welcome here. Leave immediately." "You cannot be serious," I said, looking between them for any sign of the parents I thought I knew. "Get out," my mother hissed. "Now." Stunned, I walked toward the entryway, my mind struggling to process what was happening. I need to at least get my things. What things? My father laughed coldly. Everything in this house belongs to us. I have clothes upstairs in my old room, I said, already heading for the staircase. And some personal items. My parents followed me as I entered my childhood bedroom, now stripped of most personal touches, but still containing a dresser with emergency clothes and a box of keepsakes, photos, with my grandparents' academic awards, the watch Grandpa had given me on my college graduation. As I grabbed an old gym bag from the closet and began packing these precious items, my mother shrieked, "You are not taking anything from here. Hand over that bag." "These are my personal possessions," I replied, continuing to pack. "Things Grandpa and Grandma gave me directly." Something snapped in my father's eyes. He lunged forward, grabbing a fistful of my hair and yanking so hard that tears sprung involuntarily to my eyes. "You ungrateful little parasite," he growled, dragging me toward the stairs. I struggled to break free without hurting him. He was still my father, despite this madness. He shoved me down the stairs where I barely caught myself before tumbling headlong to the marble floor below. Amelia watched from the living room doorway, casually sipping champagne with an amused expression. My father continued dragging me by my hair across the foyer while my mother followed, screaming insults that I could barely comprehend through the shock and pain. They threw me onto the front lawn, the bag of belongings scattered across the grass. Before my father could slam the door, I stood tall despite my throbbing scalp and burning eyes. "You will regret this," I said calmly. "What you have done is not just wrong, it is criminal. And I promise you will face consequences you never saw coming." I drove aimlessly through town, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as evening settled over the streets. Every certainty in my life had been shattered in a single afternoon. How could my own family betray me so completely? What had happened to transform them into these cruel strangers? Eventually, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the Lakeside Motel, a budget accommodation I had passed countless times, but never imagined staying in. The neon vacancy sign flickered as I checked in, paying with my credit card since I had literally nothing but my phone and wallet. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and cigarettes, despite the no smoking sign. I sat on the edge of the bed, finally letting the full weight of the day crash over me. My family had not only stolen my inheritance, but had physically assaulted me and thrown me out like garbage. Worst of all, they had desecrated my grandparents' memory and final wishes. That first night alone, I cycled through shock, grief, and rage. By morning, my financial analyst's mind had begun to function again, picking apart the situation and searching for answers. My first call was to Martin Goldstein, my grandparents' longtime attorney, who had mentioned the will to me several times over the years. His secretary seemed nervous when I asked to speak with him, eventually admitting he no longer handled the family accounts. "Mr. Goldstein was replaced last year," she whispered. "It was very sudden. He was quite upset about it." This detail set off alarm bells. My grandparents had trusted Martin for decades. Why would they suddenly replace him toward the end of their lives? I called Martin directly on his personal number. "Theodore," he answered, his voice instantly recognizing my number. "I have been wondering when you would call." "What happened with my grandparents' estate?" I asked without preamble. He sighed heavily. "I was dismissed under strange circumstances. Your parents brought in some attorney I had never heard of. I tried to contact your grandparents directly, but suddenly they were too ill to speak with me." My grandparents had been in declining health their final year, but they had remained mentally sharp during our weekly visits. Something was very wrong. "Do you have copies of their original will?" I asked. "I do, but they would have been superseded by any new documents." "I am afraid I cannot share them without a court order," he replied regretfully. "Theodore, if you believe something inappropriate has occurred, you should consult an independent attorney immediately." Using my financial expertise, I began investigating money movements around my grandparents' accounts in their final months. My profession had given me knowledge of banking systems and investment structures that most people lacked. Through careful research and some contacts at financial institutions, I uncovered a disturbing pattern of withdrawals and transfers, beginning about 18 months before my grandparents died. More troubling, I discovered evidence that my parents had serious gambling debts and had made several desperate attempts to secure loans against properties they did not fully own. They had been living beyond their means for years, while projecting an image of responsible wealth. Based on these discoveries, I consulted with Patricia Hernandez, an attorney specializing in estate fraud. Her office was modest compared to the gleaming towers where corporate lawyers worked, but her reputation for tenacity was legendary. "This looks suspicious," she confirmed after reviewing my evidence. "But we need more. Do you know if anyone else was close to your grandparents who might have information?" This question led me to Jonathan Miller, my grandparents' financial advisor of 20 years, who had been mysteriously replaced around the same time as their attorney. "They did not fire me," Jonathan revealed when I met him for coffee. "Your father did, claiming power of attorney. I never saw documentation of this authority, and when I questioned it, I was threatened with a lawsuit that would have bankrupted my small firm." Jonathan had kept meticulous records, including notes from meetings where my grandparents had explicitly discussed their plans for me to inherit the bulk of their estate. He also revealed something even more damning: evidence suggesting documents had been forged and financial statements manipulated. "There is a safe deposit box," he told me in a hushed voice. "Your grandfather mentioned keeping copies of his most important papers there as a precaution. It was at First National, in both your grandmother's name and yours." This revelation felt like the first ray of hope. I immediately went to the bank and, using my ID and signature, gained access to the box my grandfather had established years ago, without my knowledge. Inside was exactly what we needed: the original will clearly stating I was to inherit the business holdings and investment accounts with smaller provisions for my sister and cousins. More importantly, there was a letter in my grandfather's handwriting, expressing concern that Richard and Diana, my parents, had been pressuring him to change his will. "If anything happens, Theodore, trust only what you find in this box," he had written. While building my case, I reconnected with Mrs. Abernathy, my grandparents' housekeeper of 30 years, who had practically helped raise me during the periods when my parents were traveling. She had been dismissed shortly after my grandparents' deaths with barely any severance despite her decades of loyal service. "I have been wanting to contact you," she confessed when I visited her modest apartment. "But your parents threatened to ruin my reputation if I spoke to you, Mrs. Abernathy had witnessed conversations where my parents and sister had discussed their plans openly, assuming the loyal housekeeper was either not listening or not smart enough to understand. "They were planning this for years," she told me, her hands trembling as she poured tea. "Your sister complained constantly about how unfair it was that you were the favorite. Your father said they deserved the money more than you did because they had suffered by having less control than they wanted while your grandparents were alive." Most disturbingly, she had overheard them discussing medication doses during my grandparents' final months, conversations that now raised serious questions about their care. "I will testify to everything I heard and saw," Mrs. Abernathy promised. "Your grandparents loved you so much, Theodore. I cannot let their wishes be betrayed this way." As I dug deeper, I uncovered evidence that my sister Amelia had been actively involved in the scheme from the beginning. Bank records revealed she had already spent nearly $2 million in just 3 weeks. Luxury cars, designer clothes, and a vacation home in Aspen that she had no means to afford on her usual allowance. Medical records obtained through legal channels showed my grandparents had been prescribed unusually high doses of medications known to cause confusion in elderly patients. The timing aligned perfectly with the period when the new will had supposedly been created. Most damning of all, I discovered video surveillance from my grandparents' home security system that had never been disabled. The footage showed my parents removing documents and valuables from the house the very day my grandmother died, long before any legal proceedings had begun. With Patricia's legal guidance, we meticulously built our case over 2 months. Every document was verified, every witness statement recorded and notarized. Financial forensic experts traced the movement of funds, showing exactly how my inheritance had been diverted. The evidence was overwhelming and pointed to a coordinated effort to defraud not only me but my grandparents in their vulnerable final months. "We have enough for both civil and criminal proceedings," Patricia confirmed as we prepared to file the lawsuit. "But I must warn you, this will permanently destroy your relationship with your family. I had already lost my family the moment they chose greed over love. File everything I instructed. But first I want to give them one last chance to explain." Against Patricia's advice, I arranged to meet my parents at their home. They agreed, perhaps believing they could intimidate me as they had before. This time I recorded the entire conversation legally, with a device in my pocket. "I know what you did," I said calmly, sitting across from them in the same formal living room, where they had disowned me. "I have the original will-signed statements from Grandpa and Grandma's attorney and financial advisor and testimony from multiple witnesses about your actions." My father laughed dismissively. "You have nothing. No judge will take the word of disgruntled former employees over respected members of the community like us. You have always been the weak one," Amelia sneered, joining us with a champagne flute in hand. "Always hiding behind books and numbers instead of living life. The money would be wasted on you." I remained calm despite their provocations. "This is your last opportunity to make this right. Return the inheritance, and we can discuss a fair distribution that respects Grandpa and Grandma's actual wishes." "Get out of our house," my mother hissed. "You will get nothing from us. Ever." The final breaking point came when I noticed my grandfather's vintage Patek Philippe watch on my father's wrist, the watch that had been promised to me since childhood, that my grandfather had specifically mentioned in his letter, as belonging to Theodore alone. "You will regret this decision," I said quietly, standing to leave. "The lawsuit will be filed tomorrow morning." The court filing sent immediate shockwaves through their world. The judge ordered an emergency freeze on all assets transferred from my grandparents' estate pending investigation. My parents' panic was evident in the frantic messages they left on my voicemail, shifting from threats to awkward attempts at reconciliation. The story caught media attention. Wealthy family accused of defrauding heir of $10 million inheritance. Suddenly, my parents' social standing began to crumble. Country club acquaintances stopped returning calls. Charity boards requested their resignations pending the outcome of the case. Amelia's husband filed for separation when the scandal broke, concerned about protecting his own family assets from potential criminal proceedings against her. My parents began attacking each other, each blaming the other for ideas that had been taken too far. Their attempts to intimidate witnesses backfired spectacularly. Mrs. Abernathy recorded a phone call where my mother offered money for favorable testimony. This recording was added to the growing pile of evidence against them. The courtroom proceedings were more difficult than I had imagined. Sitting across from my family as they portrayed me as an ungrateful, greedy son was surreal. Their attorney painted them as loving parents who had merely interpreted vague instructions from confused elders. Financial experts methodically destroyed this narrative, presenting clear evidence of document forgery and account manipulation. The original will was authenticated by multiple experts, confirming it represented my grandparents' true intentions. Mrs. Abernathy's testimony proved most damaging. Her detailed accounts of overheard conversations and suspicious activities during my grandparents' final months brought several jurors to tears. The medical expert's testimony about unusual medication changes suggested potential elder abuse that extended beyond financial manipulation. Throughout the proceedings, my parents' stories contradicted each other as pressure mounted. My father eventually attempted to place all blame on my mother and sister, claiming he had been misled about their activities. When the judge delivered his ruling, his condemnation was scathing. In 40 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such calculated cruelty and flagrant disregard for both the law and basic human decency. The defendants not only defrauded the plaintiff of his rightful inheritance, but betrayed the sacred trust of caring for elderly family members in their vulnerable final days. The court ruled entirely in my favor. Every penny of the inheritance would be returned to me with additional damages for emotional distress and legal costs. More seriously, the judge referred the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution on charges of fraud, elder abuse, and document forgery. As photographers captured images of my parents leaving court in disgrace, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. The family I had known was gone forever, replaced by strangers who had valued money over love and integrity. The months following the verdict were surprisingly difficult. Despite winning back my inheritance and seeing justice served, I found myself struggling with insomnia and trust issues. The media celebrated my revenge against greedy family members, but the narrative felt hollow. What kind of victory leaves you alone, questioning every relationship you have ever had? The nightmares were persistent, dreams where I was still being dragged by my hair, but now through an endless hallway with my grandparents watching, helplessly. I began seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma, slowly processing the layers of betrayal I had experienced. Financial victory is not the same as emotional healing, she reminded me gently. Give yourself permission to grieve the family you thought you had. As the criminal proceedings against my parents and sister moved forward, I made a decision about how to honor my grandparents' true legacy. I established the William and Eleanor Matthews Scholarship Foundation, providing college funding for hardworking students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The first 10 recipients included the children of service workers, immigrants, and single parents, all demonstrating the work ethic my grandparents had valued. I also finally launched Matthews Ethical Investments, the firm I had dreamed of creating. Our mission statement included a commitment to transparency and integrity that felt more meaningful now than ever before. Within 6 months, we had attracted clients who appreciated our approach to building wealth without exploiting others. Perhaps most healing was my deepening relationship with Mrs. Abernathy, who had risked everything to stand by the truth. I purchased a comfortable home for her retirement and invited her to weekly dinners, creating a new tradition to replace the Sunday gatherings of my childhood. Her wisdom and unconditional support helped fill the maternal void left by my mother's betrayal. Slowly, I began building connections with people who valued honesty above convenience. My small circle included colleagues who had stood by me during the lawsuit, new friends who knew my story but did not define me by it, and eventually Julia, a compassion-focused attorney I met through charitable work, who understood the complexity of family wounds. When my parents were sentenced to 4 years in prison for their crimes, I felt compelled to visit them one final time, not for reconciliation, but for my own closure. The prison visiting room was stark and impersonal, much like our relationship had always been beneath the veneer of family harmony. I did not want this outcome for you, I told them truthfully. I only wanted justice for Grandpa and Grandma, and for myself. My mother refused to meet my eyes, while my father alternated between blame and half-hearted attempts at justification. Neither expressed genuine remorse, only regret at being caught. As the visit ended, I realized something profound. The weight I had been carrying was not anger but hope. Hope that somewhere beneath their actions were the parents I deserved. Releasing that hope was my true freedom. Walking away that day, I understood that forgiveness was not about excusing their actions, but refusing to let bitterness define my future. My grandparents had given me more than money. They had shown me what integrity looked like through their daily choices. That was the real inheritance no one could ever steal. Today, 5 years later, I run a successful investment firm that helps ordinary people build security while supporting ethical businesses. The Scholarship Foundation has sent 47 students to college. Mrs. Abernathy still joins me for Sunday dinners, now alongside my wife Julia and our young son William. The most valuable lesson from this painful journey was learning that family is defined by love and respect, not blood. The people who show up for you in crisis, who choose integrity when it costs them something, those are your real family. Have you ever discovered that blood ties matter less than the connections we choose to honor? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video so others can find it too. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to rebuilding. Remember, sometimes losing what we thought we wanted opens the door to what we truly need. I wish you strength if you are facing your own family challenges and the wisdom to build connections based on authenticity rather than obligation.